Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Rosa and Rubini podcast, Making Sense of This World. My name is Manas Chawla, and as always, it's a real pleasure to be joined by CEO and Head of Research, Brunello Rosa. This week, with less than 80 days to go, we're talking about the U.S. presidential race as it enters its heated final stages. The U.S. presidential race is always a weird process in the sense that it takes longer often than 2 years. And a lot changes really on a weekly basis, particularly in this cycle. But really, the key decision-making moments will come in the weeks hereafter. One of them is happening this week with the Democratic National Convention taking place in Chicago, returning to it in the first time since 1968, which was a turbulent year in U.S. politics for the history nerds in our audience. Um, there's a number of similarities as well, though, with that period, Brunello, as you point out in this week's newsletter. Can we outline some of them?
Absolutely. So the DNC returns to Chicago for the first time in many, many years, since 1968. There are lots of similarities we pointed out and some differences. So the similarities start from the fact that, um, like at the time, the incumbent president, was a Democrat, in that case, Lyndon Johnson. And also, that president decided not to run for a second mandate. You might remember Johnson took over JFK after his assassination, did his first term in 64, 68, and then had the chance to run again. But then he performed pretty badly in the primary election in New Hampshire and decided to retire. I think historians had then said that he was also ill, and in fact, he died just a few years later. But exactly like Joe Biden in this case, somehow being old, being not completely up for running, convince him to leave the race to somebody else. And then the Democratic Party was very divided at the time because of the war. These days we have war in Ukraine, Russia, and the war in Gaza that are dividing, not just the Democratic parties, public opinions around the world, but definitely the Democratic Party has these two souls, the one closer to Israel, the one closer to Palestine. In that case, there was the Vietnam War, of course, that Johnson had promoted further with the famous surge when he sent more and more soldiers to try to win. So these are just I would say, some of the similarities.
Yeah. And it's not just perhaps the people involved, but rather also the state of the country that might seem similar, the state of university, the state of political polarization. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, other similarities are the universities were in revolt at the time. It's not just the party. Students were protesting against the war in Iraq the same way students are protesting against the war in Gaza in particular, against what they perceive to be brutal operations by the Israelis. And also at the time, the country was divided between two polar opposite candidates. The young, energetic Kennedy had defeated in 1960 Nixon. That was already perceived as the old traditional establishment. And Nixon returned to run in 68. Imagine 68 was the was the year in which there were many protests around the world. It's considered to be the year of the revolutions. And the coronation of this year of revolution was the return of Richard Nixon to power. So, like today, the Democratic Party tried to stop the return of Trump. In 1968, the Democratic Party was trying to stop the return of Richard Nixon. And so clearly the return of the Democratic Party to Chicago was lived with some apprehension this time around by the Democratic Party, but instead, and of course, there are the result that they hopefully believe will be different. First of all, they hope that Trump will not win the election the way Nixon did. And first and foremost, I would say, and I don't think it's just the hope of the Democratic Party, but the hope of the entire nation, is that we will not see another assassination as it happened in 1968 when Robert Kennedy was killed in Los Angeles, and he was running for the candidacy. So these, I would say, are the bigger differences this time around that nobody, in particular Democratic Party, but I would say nobody would like to see.
Yeah. And given the fact that it's been sort of 50 or so years since 1968, there's also, interesting differences in the way that elections are run, who can be on the ballot, who funds these elections, who the big backers are. Could you tell us a bit more how it's been different in that way as well?
So absolutely. I would say one striking difference this time around is that in the first presidential term of Donald Trump, he faced the opposition of what we call Silicon Valley, so California-based liberal tech sector that somehow, wants freedom in the purest sense to innovate, to experiment, and to try to expand the borders of knowledge and so on and so forth. This time around, Silicon Valley has been polarized as well, and some of it, in fact, supports Trump and his allies. First and foremost, Elon Musk, and we all know who Elon Musk is clearly a strong supporter of Trump. He has created a super PAC, and Trump himself said that Musk has committed 45 million a month to fund this super PAC, which is very important. But then one of the associates of Musk in the funding of PayPal has decided to fund the campaign of J.D. Vance. Peter Thiel is another tech billionaire who's behind the super fast rise of J.D. Vance in the ranks of the Republican Party. And this is very new. It's never happened before, and clearly says that something has happened in Silicon Valley, and this will make the campaign of Democrats much harder to be won, because here we are talking about the new economy. It's not just the traditional constituency of the arms dealer, the arms producer, the oil, the pharma. These are the traditional funders of the Republican Party. Part of the new economy now is behind the GOP. So for the Democrats is yet one more challenge. But again, we would like to see a more civilized race from now on. I think we have seen already way too many surprises, including the assassination attempt to Trump, the change of the candidate from the Democratic Party, and so on and so forth. And if Kamala Harris wins, and already the fact that she will be nominated as the Democratic leader, woman of color, that's already a testament of a surprising campaign. From now on, it would be nice to see the return of normality, candidates debating about the economy, their plans for the future, the state of the US as a leader of the free world. But unfortunately, I don't think this will be the case. I see that polarization is so huge and the stakes are so high that I think this will remain a very heated campaign until the very last minute.
Yeah, I think for one of the very first times, it's been the case that leading political candidate like Kamala Harris has made her platform not on concrete policy positions that she uses to challenge or differentiate herself, but rather on this sort of almost, this emotional feeling of alluding to Trump as just a weird guy, as just quite a sort of political outcast. And it'll be interesting to see if that was just a byproduct of her taking on the reins to the campaign so late in the game, uh, and if it'll change in the weeks to come, is particularly as the televised debates happen, which obviously was the sort of key downfall of Biden, or if this will be enough to sustain the momentum long enough into November when the voting actually happens. But needless to say, so much more to watch and something we'll be covering time and time again, especially in the next few weeks in the run up, because it's an election that, like as we've covered in the global election sort of year of 2024, is objectively the most important one for the consequence for the state of the world. So as always, Brunello, thank you so much for your time and insight, and we'll see you next time.
Absolutely. See you next time.